So there I was, Tommy Martinez, all 5 feet and 4 inches of pure Detroit grit, standing in front of the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. The Galactic Combat Academy, where warriors are forged and legends are born. Where apparently they'd made their first clerical error in 3,000 years by accepting me. The acceptance letter had to be a mistake. I mean, come on. The average cadet here could bench press a small moon, and I once got winded opening a particularly stubborn jar of pickles. But hey, when the galaxy hands you a golden ticket to the most elite fighting force in known space, you don't ask questions. You just pack your bags and pray your life insurance is up to date. My first clue that I might be in over my head came when I walked through the academy gates and realized I was the only student who needed a step stool to reach the door handle. The second clue was when Orientation Officer Krex, a 12-foot-tall reptilian nightmare with more teeth than a hardware store, looked down at me and asked if I was someone's pet. "Cadet Martinez reporting for duty, sir," I squeaked, snapping my best salute. Krex blinked his 4 eyes in sequence, like a biological slot machine coming up all cherries. "You are certain you are not lost, tiny flesh creature?" "Nope. Got my acceptance letter right here." I waved the document enthusiastically, which probably looked like a small child showing off a crayon drawing. The orientation hall was designed for beings who could double as construction equipment. The chairs were the size of small cars, the tables required a ladder to reach, and the water fountains might as well have been geysers. I spent most of the welcome ceremony dangling my legs from a chair that could have housed a family of 4, watching as my fellow cadets introduced themselves. There was Thorax the Bone Crusher from the warrior moons of Andromeda, who apparently held the record for most opponents defeated using only his pinky finger. Next to him sat Devastia the Merciless, whose species evolved from sentient battering rams and looked like it. Then came Smasher McSmashface. And yes, that was actually his name, from a planet where subtlety was considered a war crime. And then there was me, Tommy Martinez, from Detroit. Detroit. My special skills included parallel parking, knowing which bodega had the best sandwiches, and an unnatural ability to find the one working shopping cart at any grocery store. Not exactly resume material for galactic domination. When it came time for the physical assessments, things got even more interesting. The obstacle course was designed for beings who measured their height in stories rather than feet. The first obstacle was a wall that I'm pretty sure was taller than my apartment building back home. While my classmates simply stepped over it like a minor inconvenience, I had to approach it like a rock climbing expedition. The weapons demonstration was equally encouraging. They handed me a standard-issue plasma rifle that weighed more than my cousin's motorcycle. The recoil from my first shot sent me flying backwards into a pile of training mats, where I remained for several minutes, wondering if this was how my obituary would read, and Tommy Martinez, killed by his own weapon during the first day of space boot camp. But the real highlight was meeting the instructors. These weren't just teachers, they were living legends, beings who had conquered entire star systems before breakfast and used black holes as target practice. They looked at me the way a chef looks at a particularly disappointing souffle that somehow managed to collapse before it even went in the oven. The head instructor, a granite-skinned behemoth named Commander Ironjaw, gave the welcoming speech. His voice sounded like an avalanche having an argument with a thunderstorm. "Cadets," he boomed, causing several windows to vibrate ominously. "You are here to become the finest warriors in the galaxy. You will be pushed beyond your limits. You will face challenges that would break lesser beings. And by the end of your training, you will either be transformed into unstoppable fighting machines, or you will be dead. There is no middle ground." I raised my hand. Excuse me, sir. What if we're already broken?" The entire hall fell silent. Commander Ironjaw stared at me for what felt like several geological epochs. "We shall find out, Cadet Martinez. We shall find out." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was how I knew this was going to be the longest year of my life. If I thought day 1 was bad, day 2 was like day 1's bigger, meaner older brother, who spent his free time lifting weights and collecting restraining orders. The Academy's idea of standard equipment was apparently designed by and for beings who moonlighted as small buildings. Take the combat suit, for example. Mine was roughly the size of a studio apartment and had enough extra fabric to upholster a decent-sized couch. I looked like a child playing dress-up in their parents' clothes, if their parent happened to be the Incredible Hulk's even more incredible cousin. The helmet alone could have doubled as emergency housing for a small family. "Perhaps we have something in the younglings section," suggested Quartermaster Grox, a helpful slug-like creature who was trying very hard not to laugh as I disappeared entirely into the suit's torso section. "I'm 22 years old," came my muffled voice from somewhere inside the chest piece. "Ah, my mistake. The very, very younglings section, then." The weapons locker was an entirely different kind of humiliation. The standard sidearm was roughly the size of a baseball bat and weighed about as much as a small refrigerator. I needed both hands and a decent prayer just to lift it, while my classmates casually tucked theirs into their belts like accessories. But the real fun began when I met my roommate. I walked into our shared quarters expecting to find another struggling cadet, maybe someone I could commiserate with about the impossibility of our situation. Instead, I found what appeared to be a small mountain that had learned to walk upright and developed opinions about interior decorating. "Oh," said the mountain in a surprisingly gentle voice, "you must be my new roommate. I am Bulk, from the warrior planet Smashworld. Are you perhaps someone's pet?" This was becoming a theme. "I'm Tommy Martinez, your roommate," I said, craning my neck back so far I was worried about permanent spinal damage. "And no, I'm not a pet. I'm a cadet. Probably." Bulk was 8.5 feet of solid muscle wrapped in gray-blue skin that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. His species, the Krylonians, were known throughout the galaxy for two things: their incredible strength and their surprising emotional sensitivity. Think of them as galactic therapists who could bench press a space station. "Oh, how wonderful." Bulk clapped his massive hands together, producing a sound like a sonic boom. I was worried they would give me another roommate like the last one. He kept trying to eat me in my sleep. Very rude. Very rude. "Eat you?" Yes, he was from one of those carnivorous species. No sense of boundaries. You seem much more polite. Also significantly smaller. I do not think you could eat me even if you tried very hard. "Thanks, I think." Bulk turned out to be the kind of roommate every college student dreams of, considerate, helpful, and capable of reaching the top shelf of absolutely everything. He was also surprisingly gentle for someone who could probably arm wrestle a tank and win. When I struggled to reach my bunk, which had clearly been designed for someone twice my height, Bulk simply picked me up and placed me there like I was a wayward kitten. But the real nightmare was yet to come, in the form of our primary combat instructor, the legendary, the terrifying, the absolutely unhinged instructor Grimlock. Grimlock was what happened when you took every war movie drill sergeant, fed them nothing but protein powder and existential rage for about 30 years, then compressed the result into 7 feet of pure concentrated intimidation. His species, the Varkothians, had evolved from apex predators on a world where everything else had also evolved to be apex predators, leading to what scientists called an unfortunate situation for everyone involved. He had scars on his scars, and his idea of a gentle training exercise involved live ammunition and what he cheerfully referred to as acceptable casualty rates. His left arm was cybernetic, his right eye was synthetic, and his personality was apparently forged in the fires of 1,000 battlefields and tempered in the blood of his enemies. And for reasons I couldn't quite figure out, he seemed to take my very existence as a personal insult. "Martinez," he bellowed on my first day of combat training, his voice carrying the subtle warmth of a nuclear winter. "What are you supposed to be?" "A cadet, sir?" "Wrong. You are supposed to be a warrior. But what I see is a liability. A walking target. A waste of perfectly good oxygen that could be used by someone more deserving." "Thank you, sir." That was not a compliment, Martinez. This was going to be a very long semester. By week 3, I had developed what I like to call the Tommy Martinez survival strategy, which consisted primarily of not dying and occasionally surprising everyone by accomplishing something that wasn't a complete disaster. It wasn't much of a strategy, but it was mine. The problem was that everything at the academy was designed around the concept of bigger is better. Bigger weapons, bigger armor, bigger explosions, bigger everything. The standard tactical doctrine seemed to be apply overwhelming force until the problem stops being a problem, which worked great if you had overwhelming force to apply. Less great if your version of overwhelming force was a strongly worded letter. But growing up in Detroit teaches you things that apparently aren't covered in standard galactic military doctrine. Things like, when you can't go through something, you go around it. When you can't be stronger, you be smarter. And when everyone else is looking up, you attack the ankles. It started during hand-to-hand combat training. My opponent was Crushinator Prime, a walking tank from the heavy metal worlds who looked like someone had decided to give a bulldozer anger management issues. The guy was literally twice my height and roughly 4 times my weight. In any sane universe, this would have been considered animal cruelty. Standard combat protocol, announced Instructor Grimlock with the kind of glee usually reserved for watching someone else's misery. First one to achieve submission or unconsciousness wins. Begin. Crushinator came at me like a falling building with ambitions. His strategy was apparently to grab me and squeeze until I turned into some kind of Tommy-flavored juice. Simple, direct, and probably effective against anyone who couldn't fit through a standard doorway without turning sideways. But I'd been in this exact situation before. Not against alien-killing machines, admittedly, but against bigger kids in the neighborhood who thought that being small made me an easy target. Back in Detroit, we called it the little brother special. Instead of trying to match his strength, I did something that apparently nobody in the history of the academy had ever done. I went low. Really low. Like I basically became one with the floor. While Crushinator was reaching for where my head used to be, I was busy introducing myself to his ankles. A few well-placed strikes later, and suddenly the unstoppable force had become a very stoppable pile of confused alien on the training mat. The entire gym fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop, if pins made sounds when dropped in rooms full of shocked alien warriors. "What," said Instructor Grimlock slowly, "was that?" "Ankle sweep into leg takedown, sir," I replied, trying to sound like this was totally normal and not like I just accidentally discovered fire. Basic street fighting technique from Earth. Street fighting? Yeah, you know, when you have to fight someone bigger than you don't try to be bigger. You try to be somewhere else, preferably somewhere that they can't reach. This led to what I now refer to as the Great Tactical Revelation. Apparently, in all their centuries of galactic warfare, none of these species had developed what humans called dirty fighting. Their combat was all about honor and strength, and facing your enemies in glorious battle. Very noble. Also very predictable. I started incorporating techniques I'd learned growing up in one of Detroit's more interesting neighborhoods. Nothing fancy, just practical stuff like hit them where they're not expecting it, and if something's too heavy to lift, use leverage, and when in doubt, run away and try again later. My classmates were fascinated. These were beings who had been bred and trained for combat across dozens of generations, and here I was showing them things like eye pokes and ear flicks and the ancient art of making yourself really annoying until your opponent gets frustrated and makes a mistake. Hulk became my first student. "Show me again how you made Devastia fall down by touching her foot," he said with the enthusiasm of a child discovering ice cream. "It's not about touching her foot, it's about timing. See, when someone that big is moving forward, all their momentum is going in one direction. You just help it continue going in that direction, preferably toward the ground." But while my classmates were starting to see the wisdom in what they were calling the human style, Instructor Grimlock was becoming increasingly annoyed with my continued existence. "Combat is about honor, Martinez," he roared after I'd successfully taken down 3 opponents using what I'd explained was advanced ankle diplomacy. "With respect, sir," I replied, "honor doesn't keep you alive. Winning keeps you alive. Everything else is just good sportsmanship." His eye twitched. This was not going to end well. Instructor Grimlock had apparently decided that my continued breathing was a personal affront to everything he held sacred, which, considering his species worshipped the concept of honorable combat, meant I was basically committing blasphemy every time I won a fight using something other than pure brute force. His solution was to design what he called specialized training exercises. I called them increasingly creative attempts to kill me without technically violating Academy policy. Take the obstacle course, for example. The standard version was already designed to challenge beings who could bench press small planets. Grimlock's Tommy Special version included additional features like randomly activated flamethrowers, gravity wells that changed direction without warning, and what he described as character-building laser grids. The point of this exercise, he announced to the gathered class, is to teach adaptability under pressure. Martinez will demonstrate. I looked at the death trap masquerading as a training course. Sir, are those actual missiles? Training missiles, he replied with the kind of smile that suggested the difference was largely academic. And the spinning blades? Motivational. The pit of acid? Decorative. Right, decorative acid. Because nothing says Academy training facility quite like casual weapons of mass destruction used as interior design elements. But here's the thing about growing up in Detroit: you learn to see opportunities where other people see problems. While everyone else was looking at Grimlock's obstacle course as an impossible challenge, I was looking at it as a really expensive jungle gym with anger management issues. I made it through using a combination of what I called advanced cowardice and tactical improvisation. Instead of trying to overcome each obstacle through strength, I found ways around them, under them, or occasionally on top of them. The flamethrowers became stepping stones. The gravity wells became shortcuts. The laser grids became a really dangerous game of limbo. My classmates were impressed. Grimlock was not. Martinez, he bellowed as I crossed the finish line, slightly singed but still breathing. That was not how the course was designed to be completed. But I completed it, sir. You cheated. I adapted, sir. I thought that was the point. His other eye started twitching. This was becoming a pattern. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a routine combat simulation. Grimlock had programmed the holographic opponents to be faster, stronger, and more numerous than anything we'd face in the real world. The official objective was survival for 10 minutes. The unofficial objective, at least for me, was apparently die in a spectacular and educational manner. My holographic opponents were a charming collection of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, armed with weapons that violated several laws of physics and all known concepts of fair play. They moved like liquid death and hit like angry comets. But they also moved in patterns. Everything does, once you know how to look for it. Growing up dodging bullies teaches you to spot the rhythm in chaos, to find the safe spaces between the danger zones. I lasted the full 10 minutes by doing something that apparently no one had ever tried before. I turned the simulation's greatest strength into its weakness. The program was designed to create perfect hunters, but perfect hunters are predictable. They follow the most efficient path to their target. Which means if you can make yourself a moving target, and if you're small enough and fast enough, you can stay in the spaces they can't efficiently reach. I spent 10 minutes being incredibly annoying and hard to catch, using every piece of cover, every environmental hazard, every glitch in the program's logic. When the simulation ended, I was still standing, covered in holographic scorch marks, but technically victorious. The silence that followed was deafening. "Explain," Grimlock said in a voice like grinding metal, "how you survived that." "I didn't try to fight them, sir. I just tried not to be where they were." "That is not combat. It's survival, sir." "Sometimes that's the same thing." That's when something snapped. Maybe it was the way my classmates were looking at me with something approaching respect. Maybe it was the way Bulk had started taking notes during my explanations. Maybe it was just that I represented everything his warrior culture considered wrong with the universe. "Special training," he announced, "will continue tomorrow. One-on-one." The way he said it made my survival instincts start filing paperwork for early retirement. "Sir?" "Mo. You and me, Martinez. Let's see how your cowardly tricks work against a real warrior." Bulk leaned over and whispered, "Tommy, I think you may have made him angry." "Thanks, Bulk." I hadn't noticed. This was either going to be the shortest fight in Academy history, or the most interesting. Possibly both. Word spread through the Academy like wildfire in a dynamite factory. Tommy Martinez, the human pipsqueak who'd somehow survived 5 months of training designed to kill beings twice his size, was going to face Instructor Grimlock in single combat. The betting pools started immediately, with odds roughly equivalent to those of a goldfish successfully arm wrestling a shark. "You know," said Bulk as he helped me prepare, "on Smash World we have a saying, when facing certain death, try not to die." Very philosophical. "Thanks, Bulk. That's surprisingly helpful." "Also, we have another saying, run away very fast." Less philosophical, but more practical. The entire Academy gathered in the main combat arena. I'd never seen so many different species united in common purpose before, and that purpose was apparently to watch me get turned into a small, Tommy-shaped crater in the floor. Grimlock entered the arena like a force of nature having a bad day. 7 feet of battle-scarred fury, cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the lights, moving with the kind of predatory grace that suggested he'd turned violence into an art form and then gotten a PhD in it. I entered like someone who'd very much rather be somewhere else. Anywhere else. A different planet would have been nice. A different galaxy would have been better. "Standard combat rules," announced the referee, a 3-eyed creature who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else too. "First to yield or achieve incapacitation wins. No weapons, no enhancements, no outside assistance." Grimlock cracked his knuckles, producing a sound like breaking concrete. "Any last words, Martinez?" "Yeah," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I really hope your health insurance covers embarrassment." The arena erupted in what passed for laughter among various alien species. It sounded like a zoo having a nervous breakdown. Grimlock's expression went from confident to annoyed to somewhere approaching homicidal. Again. He came at me like a freight train with anger management issues. His strategy was apparently grab the tiny human and squeeze until the squeaking stops. Simple, direct, and probably effective against anyone who couldn't fit through standard doorways without ducking. But I'd spent 5 months learning something that apparently no one in the Academy's 3,000-year history had ever figured out. Sometimes the best way to fight a bigger opponent isn't to fight them at all. I did what every small kid in Detroit learns to do when faced with someone bigger, stronger, and meaner. I made myself really, really annoying. While Grimlock was trying to grab me, I was busy not being there. When he swung high, I went low. When he went low, I went sideways. When he went sideways, I apparently went into the 4th dimension, because I honestly have no idea how I ended up behind him. "Stand still and fight like a warrior," he roared. "Mum. I'm fighting like a human," I called back, currently upside down after using his own momentum to flip myself over his head. We're surprisingly hard to kill when we put our minds to it. The crowd was getting into it now. What had started as a morbid curiosity to see how quickly I'd be defeated had turned into something approaching entertainment. Alien voices were cheering, which sounded like a symphony orchestra having an argument with a construction site. But Grimlock was learning, adapting his strategy. He stopped trying to grab me and started trying to corner me, using his reach and strength to limit my options. It was working too, until I remembered something from my childhood. Back in Detroit, there was this kid named Marcus who thought being bigger gave him the right to take whatever he wanted from smaller kids. He was faster than me, stronger than me, and had longer arms. But he also had one critical weakness that took me 3 months to figure out. He was right-handed. Grimlock, I noticed, favored his organic left arm over his cybernetic right. The left was stronger, faster, more precise, which meant when he was really trying to catch me, he led with his left. And when someone leads with their left, it creates a blind spot on their right side. A blind spot just big enough for one small, fast, annoying human. I waited for my moment, let him commit to a grab with his left hand, then slipped under his right arm and did something that probably violated several interspecies treaties. I introduced my elbow to his solar plexus at high velocity. Grimlock folded like a cheap lawn chair in a hurricane. The mighty instructor, terror of cadets across the galaxy, went down like he'd been hit by a meteor with commitment issues. The arena fell silent except for his wheezing. "Do you yield, sir?" I asked politely. He looked up at me with an expression that cycled through surprise, anger, confusion, and finally something that might have been respect. "I yield," he gasped. The crowd erupted. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the Academy's Great Hall, looking out at my fellow graduates and wondering how exactly I'd managed to survive long enough to give the commencement speech. The human who'd needed a step stool to reach the door handles was now addressing the finest warriors in the galaxy. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. When I first arrived at the Galactic Combat Academy, I began, my voice echoing through the hall designed for beings who could double as small buildings. But everyone asked the same question: what was I supposed to be? The audience, a collection of the most dangerous beings in known space, chuckled. It was a sound like friendly avalanches having a pleasant conversation. I was too small for standard equipment, too weak for standard training, too human for a warrior academy designed by and for species that evolved from apex predators. I didn't fit any of the traditional categories. I wasn't a tank like Crushinator Prime, wasn't a strategic genius like Devastia the Merciless, and definitely wasn't gentle giant material like my roommate Bulk. Bulk waved from the audience, nearly taking out several smaller species in the process. Even after all these months, he still didn't entirely understand his own strength. But you know what I figured out during my time here? Sometimes not fitting into the traditional categories is exactly what makes you valuable. Sometimes being small means you can go places others can't. Sometimes being weak means you have to be smart. And sometimes being different means you can see solutions that everyone else missed. I looked out at Instructor Grimlock, sitting in the front row with his arms crossed and his usual expression of barely contained violence. But something had changed since our fight. He no longer looked at me like I was a mistake that needed correcting. Now he looked at me like I was a puzzle he was still trying to solve. "The galaxy is full of warriors," I continued. "Beings who can bench press asteroids, who can stare down black holes, who can win battles through pure force of will and overwhelming firepower. And we need those warriors. The universe is a dangerous place, and sometimes the only answer to overwhelming force is more overwhelming force." The audience nodded approvingly. This was the kind of warrior philosophy they understood. "But sometimes," I said, letting the pause hang in the air, "sometimes you need someone who can win by not fighting. Someone who can solve problems by going around them instead of through them. Someone who can turn disadvantages into advantages and weaknesses into strengths. Someone who's too small for combat class but big enough to hospitalize the instructor." The laughter that followed was genuine, and I could see Grimlock shake his head with what might have been amusement. "Progress. The Academy taught me that size doesn't matter. Strength doesn't matter. What matters is adaptability. What matters is refusing to accept that just because something's always been done one way, that's the only way it can be done. What matters is having the courage to be yourself, even when everyone else thinks you should be someone different." I paused, looking out at the assembled warriors, and felt something I'd never expected when I first walked through those impossibly tall doors: pride. "I'm still the smallest graduate in Academy history," I said. "I still can't lift the standard weapons without help. I still need a ladder to reach half the equipment. But I learned something important here. You don't have to be the biggest to make the biggest difference. You just have to be willing to try." The applause was thunderous, literally. Several species expressed approval by roaring, others by stamping feet that could probably be registered as seismic events. It was the most terrifying standing ovation in history. After the ceremony, as I was saying goodbye to my classmates, Instructor Grimlock approached. He looked down at me with that expression he'd perfected over years of intimidating cadets. "Martinez," he said. "Sir?" "Special Forces has been asking about you." "Special Forces?" "Covert operations. Behind enemy lines, places where conventional warriors would be, noticed. He paused, and I swear I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. They need someone small, someone smart, someone who can win fights by not fighting them. He handed me a datapad with official-looking documents. Interested? Bet. I looked at the assignment details. Deep space reconnaissance, infiltration missions, solo operations in hostile territory. Will there be bigger aliens trying to kill me? Almost certainly. Sounds like Tuesday, I said, accepting the pad. Count me in. And that's how Tommy Pipsqueak Martinez, too small for combat class but big enough to hospitalize the instructor, became the galaxy's most unlikely special forces operative. Turns out the universe had been waiting for someone exactly my size all along.